Hey guys, what's up? It's Ripe again. In today's video, a crazy homeowner association called the cops on me for having a wheelchair-accessible RV in my driveway. They made my life hell and got my vehicle towed. I ended up suing them. Here is what happened. Let's dive right into the stories. Hey Reddit, I will just use this subreddit to vent about my awful homeowner association. So, to set the scene, I'm a single father to my lovely daughter Rachel, 26 years old. In March, Rachel was involved in a terrible automobile accident on the highway that left her in the hospital for 2 weeks. Luckily, she made a fast recovery but did become wheelchair-bound following that accident, losing the use of her legs. To help support her following the accident, she moved back into the old family home, and I took out a huge chunk of my savings for an RV with wheelchair access so that she was not housebound. The RV was a behemoth of a vehicle, barely fitting in my driveway safely, but I did my due diligence to check this before I committed to a purchase. The last thing I wanted was anyone to complain. But now, meet Richard Dawkins, a close neighbor and well-liked member of the community. Following a short campaign last year, we supported him in becoming the latest president of the HOA that governed our neighborhood, and we were thrilled for him. Ever since then, life had been good except for now. One morning as I was mowing the lawn, I noticed Richard stroll past before suddenly stopping and whipping his head back around like a paranoid owl, complete with wide, bulging eyes. I walked over to meet him, but his eyes remained glued to the driveway's new addition, and I could tell he was not happy. While his manner was overtly friendly like the nice old man I knew when he asked me to move the RV, I could see a deep seriousness in his eyes. Despite this, I explained the new situation with my daughter and promised to keep it out of the way as much as I could, but this was going to have to stay. So a week passed peacefully before the notices started coming in. Each morning the mailbox gifted me a notice from the HOA with a small fine for public obstruction. While I was confused that there was nothing that stood out more than the RV, so I knew that was the issue. It took a few days before I could organize a meeting to discuss the issue, in which time the notices had continued to pile up and I collected them as receipts for later. The HOA board members were very understanding to my plight, explaining ignorance as the fines, citing that Richard sanctioned them before going on vacation. In his absence, they were hesitant to act to undo the notices, but they promised no more would be sent until he returned. I was alerted by the end of his vacation with a new notice that he delivered personally, voicing outrage that I was breaking the rules and refusing to pay HOA fines, promising further punishment if I did not comply. I shut the door on him when he refused to reason. 2 hours later, we were interrupted during dinner by a persistent and forceful banging on the door. Alarmed, I jumped out of my chair to investigate. I opened the door to 2 apprehensive officers of the law, eyes starting around me to inspect the house. They explained that they had an anonymous phone call about strange noises from the RV and asked if they could take a look around. At this point, a small crowd of onlookers gathered by the pavement, Richard among them trying but failing to remain hidden. After an awkward few minutes as I stood in the public eye while waiting for the police to finish their search, they concluded that everything was above board. One even complimented the RV as they were leaving. This prompted Richard to push through the crowd and accost us from across the yard, demanding the RV be removed from the driveway. He was difficult to calm down, but at the end of their patience, the officer's threat of arrest seemed to do the trick and he stormed off back home. This seemed to only mark the start of a campaign of hatred and shaming. Richard starts against me, trying to turn my friends and neighbors against me so that he could democratically sway his authority into forcing the RV or my family out of the neighborhood. While he did fail at this, he did manage to succeed in traumatizing our family over the next few weeks since the campaign started, effectively alienating us and reducing me to seek to medicate to deal with the newly found stress and anxiety, a medication I am still on today. Like a kettle at the end of its cycle, with each passing day I could see Richard was coming closer and closer to his boiling point, and I began to have doubts. Was I the issue? Should we move? That was all put behind me, however, by his last act of trickery and malice. My daughter brought to me an idea for an abrupt road trip with the RV. She had taken the whole situation very hard as well, and I expected she was just as eager to get away. So with no qualms I agreed, and we left for roads unknown and had a blast. It was not until coming home the late Sunday evening that we discovered something was horribly wrong. This was first hinted to us early by a plume of smoke camouflaged against the on-set darkness and a pulsing orange glow peeking over the neighborhood. Rounding the corner, I found the source of the light was our front yard, which currently emitted an intense heat as it burned out of control. At this point, I could already hear the distant sirens reacting to a neighbor's call, but I was left dumbstruck to the chaos, left only able to stand and watch in horror. After the firefighters were able to wrestle it into submission, we found that much of the yard and surrounding fencing had been destroyed, as well as my spare pickup, which I had parked in our driveway while we were away. I subsequently had to fork out a lot more of my savings to repair the yard and now managed the added hassle of being one car short in daily life. When I woke up the next morning to find my RV gone completely, I think a switch flipped in my brain. Although no witnesses to the fire were spotted, I knew without any doubt that there was only one person that had the motive, and I was sure now was no different. I marched over to his house and demanded that he return the RV at once. With a disgusting smugness, he directed me to a local impound and said he had been considerate in moving it in case the yard fire magically restarted. He said with a twinkle in his eye. I told him I was calling the cops and began dialing them as I walked home, with Richard quickly on my heels. Richard had finally crossed the line, but luckily for me, that also meant that he could now be held accountable for his actions. I called the police when I got home and reported it stolen. Despite Richard's claims to try and de-escalate the situation, I slammed the door on him and left him panicking on my front porch. Following a humiliating court case for Richard and the HOA, they were ordered to pay the damages in full, all $265,000 of sweet justice. In the aftermath, Richard was promptly removed from his position of authority, and he ended up moving out of the neighborhood sometime later. Good riddance. And yeah, ripe stars, I gotta say, a lot of these HOAs lately follow a pattern. It seems like that they discriminate against disabled people for whatever reason. I find this especially sad, and I really don't understand what the point of this is. Either way, if you have ever lived in an HOA and have some horror stories to share of your own, please feel free to post them on r/ripe stories on Reddit. Thank you very much, and now let's continue with the next story. The next one is titled Mailbox Revenge. My best friend and I are both sons of police officers. His dad was a highway patrolman and mine was a deputy sheriff and detective. They are both retired now and living comfortably. This story happened shortly after we both graduated high school about 15 years ago. My buddy and I grew up in a rural area and for the most part was very quiet, and we rarely had any problems. That changed when one weekend morning my friend's family discovered their mailbox smashed and scattered along the road in front of their house. They chalked it up to a hit and run, gathered up the mail, bought and posted a new mailbox, and went on with life. The next weekend though, it happened again. Flashback: a few months before my buddy's dad retired, he decided he didn't want to quit working, so he went down to the local trade college and became a certified welder. After the second time their mailbox was destroyed, my buddy called me over to his house and we all went to work. Buddy and his dad did the welding and cutting, I did the grinding, and his mom, who is a fantastic artist, did the painting. Throw in 2 bags of cement, 7 feet of steel pipe and the necessary rebar, and you can probably guess where this is going. We built an all-steel reinforced mail bunker and set it in with 3.5 feet of concrete and road base. Remember my friend's mom, who is a really good artist? She painted it so that it looked like it was made out of wood. The steel post looked incredibly realistic even up close, let alone at night, driving a car 45 miles an hour. We posted the box, had dinner, and I went home. A couple weeks went by and bingo, my friend called me around 7 AM on a Sunday morning and told me to get over to his house ASAP. When I came around the turn to their house, there it was in full glory. A 92 Pontiac Grand Prix wrapped around a steel pole almost to the passenger compartment. The car was abandoned, but all the necessary information needed for an arrest was there. It took a couple of days to track the owner down, and sure enough, he confessed. However, there was also a half-empty bottle of Canadian Host and beer cans all over the back seat, so he got an open container charge too. At the cost of a tow truck and the medical bills for smashing his stupid face into a steering wheel, and that criminal mischief charge added up real quick. I later found out my friend's little brother stole the guy's CD book too. Realizing the mail bunker could get someone hurt, we repainted it after fixing it to something more conspicuous. Edit, time to add some context. Look, we know what we did could potentially be dangerous to others, we are not idiots. However, when we placed the new box and pole, it was well within my friend's property line and off the road. Their family owns a farm and has the acreage to spare. My friend's dad cleared off a large area with his tractor, packed the ground down and added a layer of road base. He made it large enough that the postal worker could park and be completely off the road to access the mailbox. Also, in order to get to the family's driveway, you had to drive through a soft turn. Anybody driving so fast that they might accidentally hit the box would roll their vehicle way before they would get near the box. Assuming people are following the posted speed limit and not a complete moron, there would be no way to hit this box unless you went out of your way to do so. And the next one is titled Sales Manager Revenge. So my family is from a pretty small town. It has a population of roughly 3,500 people, mostly old folks, but it serves as a hub of commerce for all the surrounding towns. Due to this, my town has a handful of car dealerships, and the one my family buys from is the most popular of all the local dealerships. So a few years ago during harvest season, I came home to help out, and it just so happened that my car, a 1998 and in excellent shape, needed an oil change. Given that it is the busy season and my family is occupied trying to pull the crop from the ground, I decided to take my car into the local GM dealership. This dealership has been selling vehicles and parts to my family for literal generations, so I trusted them. So then I pull in, toss my keys into the hands of one of the mechanics after some idle chatter, and then get cozy in the waiting room. Less than a half hour passes and I am approached by the sales manager Ronald, who is holding a stack of papers. Now, Ronald is one of the older men within the dealership. He is stern-faced and well-respected in his position. So when he sticks a pile of paperwork under my nose and tells me my brakes are going and they need to be replaced ASAP or else, I am rightfully scared. Now, I'm a young woman and I know almost nothing about cars, so what do? I call my dad. My dad answers my call, irritated because he's being interrupted in the middle of his work, and tells me to order the parts and he will replace the brake pads himself. So I relay this to the sales manager. He begrudgingly hands me over to the parts manager. The information I was given was that my brake pads were almost entirely into the red, and my rotor needed to be replaced as well because it was almost entirely rusted out. I find this information to be strange. You can usually tell when your brakes are going, right? So a simple repair easily turns into a $400 expense. I'm a university student, and after buying what I was told to, I knew I was gonna be eating only ramen for the rest of the month. So some time passes, harvest is done, and my dad comes storming into the house one day. Now, what you need to know was that my dad has an explosive temper. He will lose his mind over the small inconveniences, but this time his rage was almost entirely silent save for the stomping and slamming of the doors. It is then that I am told to put on some pants because we are going into town. The entire 15 minutes of the trip was quiet. I was silently crapping myself the whole way until we pulled up to the dealership. For some context, my family is a relatively big name in our community, as my father and 3 of my uncles all have their own separate homegrown businesses. A lot of their success is owed to some of the community, and as a way of saying thanks, my family frequently makes donations to public projects. So it's pretty difficult to do business in town without running into someone who shares my surname. Inside the dealership, my dad tells me to sit down and shut up while he storms into the sales manager's office, closing the door behind him. My dad almost instantly explodes with rage, and even through the shut door, everyone in the dealership heard exactly what my dad had to say. To summarize, Ronald, the sales manager, lied to me. Which is not much of a surprise. You hear stories about people getting the wool pulled over their eyes all the time, especially women. Turns out, when my dad graciously began to replace my brake pads, he noticed immediately that I had been told a load of BS. My brake pads were hardly worn and my rotor was perfectly fine. His only daughter had been tricked out of a lot of money and he was pissed. So my dad replaced everything and gave Ronald what was coming. He laid it out, telling Ronald exactly what he was gonna do, and my dad was gonna tell everyone. He was gonna tell his business partners, his friends, my uncles and their customers, everyone in the local pub that night the truth and how everyone's favorite GM dealership tried to screw over his kid. My dad is a pretty popular guy and he knew how to work the power that small towns held. You see, if the daughter of an influential businessman can get screwed over, what about everyone else's kids and grandkids? In less than a week, word had spread across the entire town. That same year, the amount of GM vehicles around town became fewer and fewer. A new parts shop opened up next door to my uncle's electrical shop, and it just so happens the Ford dealership in town built a brand new building to accommodate the influx of business just last year. I know firsthand that my family, extended included, buy their GM and Chevy vehicles from the province next door. I am absolutely certain that if this town was not as small as it was, nothing would have happened to the dealership or Ronald. But it goes to show the power of tight-knit communities. Old Ronald was eventually encouraged to retire. And the best part of all of this? My dad and I left the dealership that day with a personal check tucked in my wallet as an apology. No more ramen for me. And the next one is titled Poker Face Revenge. So this is not one of those "I waited on this revenge for years" story, but rather one of those that makes your day a little better. My job is very strict and professional and practically requires a poker face, but my poker face often looks like a resting bitch face. Through 5 years of my job, almost every other day I get that frickin' "you should smile more" sentence. I would politely say that we are not doing anything funny right now and proceed with my job while they insist even though we are not doing anything funny, it doesn't hurt to smile. I just don't reply to that, wrap up my job and greet away. Today was the last straw that broke the camel's back. Another one rolls up and I feel his look on me while I was scanning his documents and he goes, "Did someone make you mad?" I don't reply and he still insists, "Why are you not smiling?" I say my usual line and he still pushes it and I snapped and said, "My grandma died, do I still have to smile to you?" I could see how he started to blush and then he started to stutter like, oh, I didn't know, I'm so sorry, my regrets." I just shrugged him off by telling him, "Next time you will probably think before you tell someone to smile for you." Of course my granny did not die, I did not even meet my grandmothers. But I hope he learned a lesson that not every female in the world is willing to smile to him just because he said so. Next one who says that to me will get, "No, I don't think I will smile. Smiling gives wrinkles." And the next one is titled, Worst Manager Ever. So I worked for a high street retail chain that in their infinite wisdom ditched the store manager position and instead had 4 assistant managers running a store. This led to intensive workplace politics as the more competitive staff kept trying to pull stuff to make out that they were the big dog, despite the fact that we were all on the same level. So, setting the scene, our area manager asked each of us to produce a weekly rota so that between us we would have a month's worth of rotas prepared. The most pedantic, least liked and most determined to be the big dog assistant manager took this as their 9th billionth opportunity to try to pick apart our work to satisfy their superiority complex. And of course also to criticize our work to make out like they were managing the managers. Pretty sick of the constant unnecessary workplace politics, I decided to bring them down a peg or two. I found every excuse to delay producing my rota until I knew that everyone had finished doing theirs. The pedantic assistant manager badgered me all week, again trying to manage someone at the same level for extra superiority points. Cue the revenge. On the last day before we were due to submit, all the assistant managers were in, so I took the opportunity to make my own rota from scratch. Having finished it, I saved it and then produced a second rota to set a trap for my micromanaging colleague. Basically, I copy and pasted their rota so it was an exact replica of theirs. I then let the 2 other fed-up assistant managers know what I have done so they can enjoy the imminent spectacle. That lunch, it came time for us to compare the rotas and with the usual predictability have our rotas picked apart by our pettiest of colleagues. They went first to assert misplaced dominance, everything seemed fine, so we moved on to the next one. The next rota came out and although it was perfectly fine, it was criticized left, right and center by the usual culprit. The next rota came out and again, despite being a perfectly acceptable rota, needed tweaking, critiquing and changing to meet our annoying colleagues' faux higher standards. Finally, we come to my rota and I open up the spreadsheet with the copied rota and lo and behold, it is not good enough. After a solid 5 minutes of them criticizing their own router with my colleagues and I increasingly beaming as we feed off the pure schadenfreude energy, I explained that I found it interesting that there are so many mistakes with mine when it is exactly the same as the first router we all looked at. This prompts our colleague to quickly flit back and forth between the two rotors, going an increasingly obvious shade of beetroot before then feigning outrage that I supposedly just copied their work, for which I'm going to get reported. At this point, I highlight that won't be necessary as I bring up my real router and then announce I'm gonna go back to the shop floor. My two grinning colleagues do the same, leaving the final petty assistant manager alone to fully soak in the petty revenge they've just been served with. And yeah, Ripe Stars, I gotta say, I know exactly what OP is talking about. There are just these people in life that always try to criticize you even if you do something right. They just always think they are better than you even if you do a good job. Have you ever dealt with such people? And if so, what have you done? Let us know in the comments, and as you can hear, Disney is crying, so unfortunately I gotta end the video. Thank you for watching, and I hope to see you again tomorrow.